Meet PitchDB, the ultimate platform for speakers looking to make their mark on podcasts, conferences, and media outlets. PitchDB provides access to over 3 million platforms, ensuring you find the perfect avenue for your message. With AI integrations, your bios and pitches are tailored uniquely to each opportunity, giving you the edge you need. Join now at pitchdb.com.
Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. One of the first things that struck me about my guest today, Corey Poirier, is that he has the best URL for his book that is in pre-order, because I just went to Amazon to check it out, in the world. So Corey, I know we're going to get into a lot of other discussions, but I had to flag that because just thisisthebook.com, that's so impressive.
Well, thank you so much. And I mentioned off air that I grabbed it a long time ago, honestly, with the idea that at some point I'll probably use it. And honestly, as well, the truth is I've been using it now for quite a while. Well, one of my other books, we had basically, it was up to get either, originally it was up for a waiting list. And then once it was available, it was up for that. But one of my previous books, we used it for that book, basically for years. So it was kind of like the opt-in page for that book. But I will say this is kind of an on-brand thing for me, and I don't know how, because I never planned them separately, but my brand sort of nickname for years was That Speaker Guy.
Yeah.
And so it's like almost like the only speaker guy. This is the book, implying like this is the one book you need to get. And I could go down the list. I had probably about 10 that follow that suit. So I think this is on brand for me.
Well, that's fantastic and delightful. And I also, there are so many ideas, I think like many entrepreneurs in my head, that I have so many websites that I've just reserved, as well as social media accounts, right? That I don't even know if I'm going to get to in this lifetime, but hopefully I will someday. And I think it's important to do that when you see something that really sparks you, or you come up with that idea, grab it before anybody else. And before we get into more about your book, I really want to discuss, because you do something that is up there. People don't want to public speak. People fear it more than death, right? If they're at a funeral, they'd rather be the person in the coffin than the person giving the eulogy, is something we always hear. I'm not that person. I love public speaking, and obviously you aren't. But you started out in business, branding, publishing. You've had a long radio show that has had amazing guests on it. You are a best-selling author, speaker yourself, and you help book people to make money speaking and help them. Because I think that's another thing, when people decide they want to take that leap, they don't know how, right, to monetize it. So these are all things I really want to dig into, but I want to find out, did you always love public speaking? Did you always know that you wanted to be involved in this arena, and the other things were steps to get there?
So my whole life, I wanted to be a rock star. When I say my whole life, I mean my whole kid life, not my adult life. I thought I wanted to be a rock star. And obviously there's a component of rock star that involves getting on stages, talking with audiences, sharing your story to some degree, maybe a story of a song or what have you, how it came about. There's a component of that I always felt I wanted to do. And when we were younger, I was terrified doing it, but we did we called it Blue and White Day, but it was like the variety show at school.
Oh, yeah.
And
like the talent show.
Yeah, the talent show.
The bands, those type of things.
Yeah. But with us, it was lip singing. So it wasn't even playing. But I knew how to play guitar somewhat, so I knew chords. And so I was able to make it look like I was playing. Well, we did that in school, and that was a big, big fear. And then a couple of years later, I put together my first CD, recorded a CD. And we went and played a show, a Battle of the Bands, with about 1,000 people there. And that was a nerve-wracking thing. And so I did those things before speaking ever entered the picture. Then I launched my own business when I was 19, a newspaper, a publication. And because I was so young, people were in small little town were saying, oh, we want you on the radio. And we want this. And one of those things was, we want you to go speak to a group. I'd never done that. I didn't even know what that meant. And I was terrified. So to answer your question, originally, I was terrified of the idea of being on stage, terrified, like knees shaking. I went and did this talk. I turned different shades of color. Had so much sweat that I whatever water I drank that day was gone. And it was terrible. And when afterwards I said to people, I didn't even know what to say, but I was like, what'd you think? And they were like, I don't know what the heck you were talking about, but you're sure excited saying it. So you sold me.
Wow.
Be a lesson about how if you're passionate about something, sometimes the people will forgive your technique and all the other stuff. But I said that to go back a step because I first started to say, I knew I wanted to be a speaker or whatever, but no, I didn't. I was uncomfortable. I didn't want to actually be a speaker, but I thought I wanted to be a rock star. Lucky for me, because not everybody gets this, but I got to live both dreams, meaning I did put out 4 CDs. One of them was nominated for Rock Recording of the Year. I did tour. I put out a music video, that got picked up. I was on radio. So I got to experience that side of what I thought I wanted. And then at the same time, the speaking didn't come as natural. I actually thought I wanted to be a writer. So like even with music, I felt my strength was songwriting first and foremost. And so I want to be the writer in the basement that writes for other people and they get all the accolades.
Right.
But eventually I realized on the music side that if I didn't do it, nobody else would. They would take the song. I've had people do that. They would take the song I wrote and it'd be a totally different song. So that one side, I was like, well, maybe I need to get in front of an audience. And then I wrote a stage play for a Fringe Fest, and one of the actors got hurt, and he couldn't do the whole run of the play. So because of that, I had to write parts in for the guy who didn't want to be in because I was the only other person that knew the lines. At the end of it, I said to one of the actors, how can I get over this? He said, I don't know, but I'm going to a stand-up comedy workshop at the university next week. Do you want to join me? I said, sounds terrifying. I'm in. So I went 2 weeks of class. Then we were supposed to go watch people entertain us. We worked our butt off to fill the venue because we thought it was going to be like a clinic afterwards. We talked about what we learned. And the guy that put the show together told us with 5 minutes notice that we were actually the comics that he had booked for the night.
What?
We had already 8 people left the front door out of 15. And I went up and bombed horribly, told the same jokes twice in 10 minutes because at first I didn't turn the mic on. And so I did the first part with no mic on and then told the same jokes again, bombed horribly, and then started going back every week, performed 700 shows over 9 years. And that's what got me into speaking because one of the people there invited me to go see a guy named Tony Robbins, who I knew of, but didn't know he was a speaker. I thought he was just the guy that sells these infomercials and programs. And I went, and at the end of it, the person said, can you believe how much you got paid to do this? And I said, well, how much? He said, well, my friend was involved in the booking committee, and he told me how much. I was like, record scratch. What? People get paid to do this? And put me on to speaking, and that's how I got into it. So that was a longer journey than I planned it, Anika, but it kind of tells you I wasn't naturally meant to be on stages.
Well, what it tells me is that you were meant to be on stages. You just didn't know it yet. But the little thing inside you, right, that pushes you forward, knew it. Okay, so you have to tell us, what did you record under? Was it your name? Was it a band name? Because now, of course, I and my listeners, people watching, are going to have to go look up your old content, your old videos.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I'm thinking myself if you're looking it up. And so I just, with curiosity, I looked up Corey Poirier and music. And what I found is like a photo of me covered in sweat, but actually because I was in a hot environment playing music, a little different than comedy or speaking. But I also found the videos that shows at the top. The music video I was talking about is called Your Jacob.
Yeah.
And it's up there. So when I type in Corey Poirier music, a few of the things come up. The interesting part is, I forgot about this, but when we titled it, we called it Your Jacob by motivational speaker Corey Poirier. And we did, I was trying to cross brands, cross-pollinate.
Wow. Oh my.
So I was even thinking that part through. But and it's kind of funny because I forgot this, but it was literally released on my birthday almost 10 years ago to the day now, that music video. But yeah, so if you type in that, and then the other thing, let me just see here. The name of my CD that was nominated was called Evil Anthems. And when I look right now, I type in Corey Poirier Evil Anthems. It shows the music award nominees announced. Yeah, it shows some different things you can find. Like it shows press releases on when we released it and all that kind of stuff. The music video comes up that way too. So if you type in Corey Poirier Evil Anthems, that's one way you can find some of the. And the weird part is, at the time, I don't know what their timeline is, but for a long time, the album was available on all the song sites. Obviously iTunes, but like all the sites. But I noticed now it's not. So, I mean, but that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So it worked its way out of that. But yeah, if you go on there, if you type in those, you'll find it. And I think if you typed in Corey Poirier music on YouTube, you'd probably find a few of the songs as well that we put out. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, but okay, multi-talented. So moving from rock star to comedian successfully to international speaker and best-selling author.
It's definitely been a journey. I will say that a lot of those things, what I find fascinating, and this is the life lesson to me and hopefully for other people to some degree, is I would say it this way. It doesn't matter what happens to you, it's what you do next. And when I say that, I feel that also extends, it doesn't matter where you start, it's what you do next. And so Zig Ziglar had this great quote that said, you don't have to be great to get started, but you certainly have to start to become great.
Exactly.
And one of the things I learned, so this is the takeaway for me, is that I don't imagine it's absolute like any field in the world, but for the most part, what you start out as at something doesn't dictate what you're going to become with something. And you can truly become, I don't want to say a master because I don't want to call myself a master, but you can become really good at a craft that you really suck at if you put in the 10,000 hours. So the prime example is when I first started playing music, I had a girlfriend that said, stop, when she heard me for the first time, stop playing. That's terrible. And I said, are you saying I couldn't play in public? And she said, I'm saying if you do, let me know so we can end this relationship so I don't, have to live with the embarrassment of that. And so that was my start. And honestly, the part I don't like to admit, Anika, is she probably wasn't that far off from wrong. I was tone deaf. I still to this day don't know how to tune a guitar by ear. I'll still use a tuner, but I was tone deaf. My singing, when I listen back then, I cringe. Like all the stuff was bad. My guitar playing was choppy. Like everything was bad. And, to go from that and then playing in front of 3,000 and 4,000 people and putting up videos, the only thing that happened between there was blood, sweat, and tears.
Right.
Like I put it time over and over again. Comedy. By the end of the comedy, I had produced a few shows where I do a 45-minute set of me and getting laughs. And that's when I'm starting with 5 minutes where I couldn't get a chuckle or a snicker.
Right.
And so I've watched that happen in all my life. Like, so I bring up, you mentioned writing is what made me think of it. So I've written numerous books now. Well, I didn't read my first book till age 27. I didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction when I was 19 and left school. And honestly, I got a 49+1 in one of my classes. I barely graduated. I don't even know if I'd technically graduated. I legally did, but I don't know if I technically did because a teacher gave me the +1. I look at all those things, and then later on writing books that are, the dream was to be signed with a publisher at some point. And, so to be signed now with a New York publisher and, to have your book at Walmart and Target and these places. I didn't anticipate that could ever happen as a person that couldn't even read a book. Now, couldn't read a book is subjective. I just hated books. I didn't like them. And I told my mom, I remember one time, I think I want to write a book. And she said, I think you have to read one first.
Well, it's all about finding the kind of book that sparks the interest and love of reading. None of us are readers until we find that one book that creates that magic for us. I have a kid, so I've seen that firsthand. Now she's a voracious reader. So is that the age where you found that book that changed your perspective?
It is, and there's a part of me that wants to see if I can see it here to show it. But it is here. If I can find it, let me just show you. It's not the version I read of it, right? I think it's right there. Of course. Yeah. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Yeah. Okay.
I bought this version. This is like an original printing, because it's one of those books that meant that much to me. I'm looking here, but it's like this was 1936. It was the 57th printing, which is not that when you have a book that sold millions of copies, 57th printing isn't that far off. But I actually bought his other book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, which was one of the next books I read. And that book, it was the 6th printing that I bought. So so that was the first book I read. And then the second book I ever read was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Okay. And I have an original, first printing. And I've often said that if you're going to start late, those are two good places to start. So I feel like
did you go back to Wallace Wattles too?
I have Wallace Wattles over here on my shelf as well. Yeah, The Science of Getting Rich. I have it somewhere there. And
I have his trilogy on Audible. So
really?
Yeah. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. So that's the book that started it all, Dale Carnegie, and why it started it all. So you said until you find the book. So what that book did for me that the other ones didn't, it took me a bit to figure this out because I'm like, why did I not enjoy reading and then go now reading like 3 and 4 books at any given time?
And not just like fiction, fun, lighthearted, like business books. Yeah. Like you got into it.
Really. Like, I mean, I read Success Magazine almost every month as well and have for years now. So for me, what Dale Carnegie was able to do is there's no question he was a master storyteller. Mm-hmm. What was missing for me is, I feel what was missing was the type of storytelling I was looking for. So I say that for one reason, because the only other books I ever tried to read, there were 4, was How to Win, what is it called? To Kill a Mockingbird, Death of a Salesman, Lord of the Flies. And if they sound familiar, these are all books from school that they said we should read.
Yeah.
And I finished them. Now, the interesting part now, I mean, I am watching the movies of each of those and the stories are great. So that's why I says not necessarily that the stories aren't good. And probably I haven't, but I could go back and read all three of them now and enjoy them because now I'm a reader. The fourth book I tried was Cujo by Stephen King. And it didn't pull me in. It wasn't that it was scary. It just didn't pull me in. The movie scared the crap out of me because I'm a dog lover. So it freaked me out. But having said that, those four books didn't work. But what Dale Carnegie did is it was real stories.
Yeah.
And like that was the difference in all four of those books of Dale Carnegie. Lord of the Flies, I think, was based on a real story. But Dale Carnegie's was real stories. And he started the book with this guy named Two Gun Crowley. And the premise was this guy killed a bunch of people. He even murdered cops. And when they found the note, because they had a shootout, and I think he got killed in the shootout, they found a note and he said, I don't know why everybody always picks on me. All I've ever wanted to do is good in the world. And one of the things he did was a cop walked up to him and he just shot the cop in cold blood. But he thought that it was everybody who was picking on him. And so the premise, if I remember correctly, because this is going back a long time, was that everybody in their own way, like doesn't see the other person's perspective, then thinks from their perspective, they're doing the best they can in the world with what they have. Yeah. And I think he moved into Al Capone and shared a similar story about how Al Capone talked about, all I'm doing is trying to help my city, and so, but those stories pulled me in. And I think that was the big thing. He pulled me in from the first page before I gave up, and he pulled me in and I couldn't let go. Like I read the whole book in basically overnight after never reading a book. And then that same weekend, I read it again a second time. So
you went from 0 to 1,000.
Exactly. And then, like I said, then I found Think and Grow Rich, and then I discovered Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie didn't put out a lot of books. Like he has a few different versions of a public speaking book, but he didn't put out a lot of books while he was alive. But the How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, which I find fascinating. Most people don't know about that book, and it sold like 15 to 20 million copies. Most people don't know it exists. Yeah. But I discovered it after Think and Grow Rich, and then so I knew I had to jump in. I will say How to Stop Worrying has the same idea and premise as How to Win Friends, but it didn't pull me into the same level. Yeah. I've read it, but it was in multiple sittings. I would go back and forth with it. It basically, obviously, it's about the concept of how people worry themselves sick.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, it's so funny because today I was just sitting going, my executive function is overwhelmed right now. So I need to take a step back and just be okay with that and live within myself and not stress about the 5 million things on my plate. And just think about what are the things that I need to get done today? What are the things that I need to be present for today? And it can be really hard to get there. But when I live in the other space where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not living up to all these other people's expectations. I'm not performing the way I know I can perform. I had to get comfortable with disappointing other people so that I could get more comfortable with realizing what I needed to do to take care of myself. And so that's kind of what I'm hearing, I think, when you're talking, is that space of really understanding our motivations, other people's motivations, and moving from that place. Yeah,
absolutely. I would say that's absolutely true. And honestly, it took me a long time to understand my own motivations, let alone other people's. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of those, like, even if I look at finding one's purpose, it took me a long time. So, I mean, and when I say at age 27, a lot changed for me in my mid-20s. Like, that's when I did the comedy that night. Whenever I did that, people are like, oh, did you meet someone because you seem different? That's whenever I was battling at the time generalized anxiety and hypochondria. Hypochondria is basically, for those that don't know, every time you hear about a disease, you develop the symptoms of said disease. I went through that for 4 years.
Oh, my gosh.
The only thing that changed is when I got in that comedy stage that night and people started saying there's something different about your energy. It took like a month and I didn't even notice, but it was gone. So I say now I took vitamin P, P for passion. What I will say too is I discovered that passion is the gateway to finding your purpose. So to me, passion is what you do. So photography, stand-up comedy, a podcast, what have you, that's the what, and that's passion. You're passionate about it. And that can change a lot. Mm-hmm. But your purpose is your why you're doing it. And I find that doesn't change as much. Yeah. And so for me, the passion was, say, comedy. And then the passion was speaking. The passion was writing. Mm-hmm. But the purpose is to create a positive ripple and an invisible impact in other people's lives. That part, it took me even 5 years after I discovered my passion to figure out why I was actually doing it.
Yeah. But when you're working from a purpose-driven space, so many more things open up to you, even when it's hard, right? It wasn't easy. You talked about having to really learn and practice to be a musician and get to the point where you were good. But then going from that to releasing multiple albums, being, nominated for national, for big awards. You talked about the first night you tried comedy, you bombed, but then you were able to produce shows. You were able to, by the end of it, do a 45-minute set, which is insane. I haven't really tried to be funny in that way, right? I could go up and just talk about whatever, but not make people laugh necessarily at the same time. And so it's not easy, but when you do live in your purpose and you do use these different passions and pursuits, that is, I think, where the magic happens. And that is why you've been able to now become, have a radio show, be a keynote speaker, and also have the speaking program and continue to write more books.
I think you're right. The one thing for certain as well is it allows you to overcome the obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
So with all the things that you're presented with and the obstacles you're hit with, having a purpose allows you to overcome those. Meaning, it could be as simple as it could be simple, but seems like small stuff, but could actually get a person to say, I'm not in for this anymore. I think about, I just did some interviews in Phoenix, and it was the Hayos conference was there. And so I spent one day interviewing people and fairly big name thought leaders. And one of them, I booked this venue, which sight unseen looked great on paper. It looked so great when we got there. And I didn't know what to do in the sense that, do I cancel? And which didn't feel like an option. But I need to at least alert the people hey, this isn't what I thought it would be. Without going into too much detail, I was just we got to the venue. It doesn't look like I thought whatsoever, and just to give them a heads up in case they said, well, can we pick a different place? So that happened. And then the first person he showed up. He was gracious. He's like, no, let's make it work. And then we offered to drive him back to the venue because I messaged the other guy who we were messaging with that day and said, let's switch to a different place. Meaning try to get him before he even left to head to where we were.
Right.
Let's go to where you're close to where you're at. So we drove the other speaker back, and then the person that was communicating stopped. And then, we figured, okay, well, we'll just go to the place. He must have got busy and didn't reply. And so I, walked with my suitcase up to this place. We were going to do an outdoor interview. And then I finally called him because I'm now it's 15 minutes after. He goes, hey, how's it going? He goes, oh, I'm actually at the place that you booked. We're just waiting for you here.
Oh.
So the first time he didn't get my messages was whenever we said, let's meet somewhere else. So then we had to run down the street. Well, my zipper broke on my bag, which had all the stuff in. So then I'm carrying it, running down the street. And to go back into the parkade, and all the time you're thinking, well, we're already 15 minutes late. Now we got to get a car back out of a parkade and drive 20 minutes across town. Anyway, he got there. He had his laptop out, a little printer. He was just having a great old time. Didn't bother him a bit.
That's amazing.
But what I'm saying is, about all that is, that's the kind of stuff that when you live on purpose, you can deal with.
Yeah.
But if I was going through all that for something I didn't enjoy,
right,
it'd be so easy to go, where's the towel? Well, I'll throw it in now. I will say the other thing that helps me, and I don't think I have one in front of me to show you, but I carry this poker chip around that says E plus R equals O. And what that stands for is event plus response equals outcome. Yeah. And in terms, what that means is every day we get hit by different events. We can't control the events. What we can do is choose our response, and that'll dictate the outcome we want.
Exactly.
So I carry that chip around with me every day to remind myself that this is the event now. Okay, great. I can't change it. What do I do now? And so then I can focus on what's the outcome I want. If that's the outcome I want, how am I going to respond? So in this case, I said, okay, the outcome I want is for them to come here and not be shocked by the place and go, why didn't you give me a heads up? So then the response I gave was just a heads up. The place doesn't look like I thought it would. Mm-hmm. So now when you come here, you'll know that. And I even said the outside looks like the movie set for Desperado. So got there and it was all sand was the whole yard. And then the guy was on the deck with a rocking chair swinging back and forth and had a straw in his mouth. And next to him was a growling pit bull.
Wow. Yeah.
That was the best going to film. So that E plus R equals O I carry around with me. It's a constant reminder that I can always choose my response.
Yes. That is something that's so vital in today's world where people are so quick to react to things and sometimes scared to share and respond. Obviously, you're not scared. And this is something, because I teach grad school and I talk to my students about this a lot. And we all have our own things that we're coming into class with. Something didn't go right at work or with a child, or they're dealing with a crisis or health or whatever it might be. And I really want them to bring their whole selves and be able to be honest with each other, because that's the only way that we will all grow as this human society, right? And that's the only way we'll give each other kindness and be able to say, oh yeah, you have expectations. I'm going to go meet Corey Poirier. I'm going to be interviewed for his show. that has had all these luminaries on it. I'm so excited. Oh, okay. I now know the place is not going to necessarily be what he thought it was, but that's okay because I'm really excited to meet him, right? So that's just fantastic. I love that framing and I love your storytelling. So let's talk about, you have Conversations with Passion as a radio show for over 11 years. How did that start? Was that when you were weaving in comedy? Was that post-comedy?
So I started it post-starting comedy while still doing comedy.
Yeah.
So the comedy ended up being 9 years and it overlapped. And so literally I can remember the person that got me into, well, I'll call it podcasting now, but it was online radio at the time. Like people weren't even using the term podcasting that often.
Yep.
And we started out on Blog Talk Radio.
Oh, yeah.
Just still going. But that's how we started. The component that I was sold on it and then I didn't even use it was going live. That's why I went that road, is because it was easy to go live and you could get more listenership live. But I wanted to create like a variety show. So our first early shows had like 7 guests. We'd have and I say 7 guests, it was all pre-recorded, of course. So we'd record 7 interviews and we'd take clips from each of them. And then we'd have like a clip from a stand-up comic that I knew. And we'd have a clip from this guy. I remember his name was John Dunsworth. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he played a character named Mr. Leahy on Trailer Park Boys. So John had these 2 recordings of stories and he gave me permission to use those during our show. And so I would run like a clip. Hi, it's John Dunsworth. And then he'd talk about his thing and then be like, hey, this is Nathan McIntosh, and doing stand-up comedy. And then, then we'd have a Jack Canfield talk, doing an interview. And it was just all over the place. So you can't do that live. It's too, it's too intense.
Yeah.
We did an hour-long kind of variety show, but we started with Blog Talk Radio. And yeah, I'd have to look up the year soon, but it's well over 11 years. And so it was early on, but I started it because I used to have a newspaper and it was called Island Business News. I mentioned I started one early on in life, but then I kind of walked away from that one after a year. Well, later on, I always felt like I never closed the doors properly. So once I was full-time as a speaker, I realized I could run the paper too. So I launched it, ran it for 7 years monthly. And near the end of it, it was still growing. And where I was at today, literally, I could still be running that paper and it would still be bringing in a good revenue for a small town. But the problem is it couldn't grow beyond the small town because newspapers are shutting down.
Right.
It's just that this area doesn't have a lot of competition. So like there's an arts newspaper that started before us and was going the whole time we were going. It's still going to this day. Yeah. And when I look at the revenues, because you can figure it out by ad sales, they're like, for as long as I can remember, they've been doing $500,000 a year in a place where the average income is $27,000 a year.
Wow.
So the newspaper part, you can survive with it, specialty newspaper, more so than daily. The dailies are struggling. It's because you can do it monthly and charge ad rates monthly. So somebody can afford $300 a month a lot easier than trying to do daily papers where they want like $3,000 for one ad. So having said that, I could still be going, but I realized it couldn't grow beyond here. And I felt I had to grow beyond the small town. So I converted it to a podcast, that show.
Nice.
But what happened was I brought over a bunch of the sponsors, which worked really well because immediately doing a podcast, I had 6 figures in revenue coming in, which is rare. With
Very
sponsors,
rare.
with 0 listeners, because it was day one and I carried them over. But it's because they trusted me from the newspaper. And so I launched, and our launch was really big. Like we had 6,000 listeners for our first episode. This is going back a long time. And by the way, it was because at the time, if you had followers on Facebook, you could they got rid of this long ago.
Oh, yeah.
They go, send one message to everybody.
Oh, yeah. I used to have a digital and terrestrial radio show. This is maybe 7-8 years ago in Houston, Texas. And we also shared it on Facebook Live. And we'd be sitting there when we had our breaks or whatever, just like, okay, well, we actually had to do like invite, like all the people individually, but it's still, and now you would get spam like, nope, you're blocked. You cannot do that anymore today.
Yeah, I think now, like even if you did it as an event, you can only invite 50 people, I think, like to an event now or something. They have definitely over 50 people at every.
Yeah, I think it's like 500, depending on. But anyway,
definitely.
Yeah.
And not only that, back then people saw it. Like the algorithms were set that everybody sees everything. Yeah. Now it's designed that, you want people to see it? Oh, you got to put some money behind this.
Exactly.
So then, I could just press a button, and it wasn't even considered spam because nobody else was doing it, and it was just a new thing. So that allowed us to have a lot of listeners really quickly. But having said that, we launched it and ran it. It's still going now. It morphed and evolved. I got rid of sponsors long ago because I wanted to have one guest per show because I used to have a producer when it was so big. And I wanted to not have a producer anymore because it was too hard for my travel schedule and lifestyle.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was hard to have a variety show like that. It was too much time every week to interview people. The sponsorship was too much to manage because they would have their own, I want it this way, I want it that way, all that stuff. So all that stuff, I just realized the revenue that it was bringing in by me getting booked as a speaker and all the other things was way bigger than the sponsorship. And so I just made it a show that I could make work. And then I will say the name Conversation with Passion is still out there and is still used with the show sometimes, but we also evolved it to being called Let's Do Influencing as well. Okay. So if you look for it, you can find the older episodes under Conversation with Passion, the newer ones under Let's Do Influencing. But the show morphed immediately. Like it wasn't like I stopped and started. I literally changed stuff like the names on different platforms and stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason was, by the way, is because people were back then were starting to really get their butt up in the air about the word passion. People were saying, I'm sick of people saying, find your passion. And it's leading people down the wrong path. And it makes people feel like they're a failure if they haven't found it. I just was a pushback. And I'm like, I like the conversation that creates in the show. But I also get the idea that if people are pushing back against the word, if they're scrolling for a show to listen to and they see a word they don't like, they're just not tuning in.
Well, so you could say that about the word influencing too, because it means so many different things to so many people. Now, if you're a marketer and advertiser in that world, you know that people also will listen to somebody they trust, and they are very influenced by their friends and family and people who recommend a brand. And user-generated content is all the brands are using that now versus professional content because they want to appear more authentic and genuine to their audiences. So it's not a bad word, but I feel like that's another word with passion that people sometimes misconstrue.
Yeah. And you know what? Honestly, I realized after I made the first change that no matter what name I picked, you're not
going to please everybody. Yeah.
And you could run up against that. And so I ultimately decided, because there was same idea. I was like, do I change it again? But ultimately I decided that for me, influencer, and not me as an influencer, but the word influence, I resonated with more, and it was more on brand for me.
Mm-hmm.
So the passion was more on brand for me early on. I mean, I wrote a book called The Book of Why and How, meaning how to find your why. I did talks for years called Fueled by Vitamin P, which was the passion. And my new book, The Enlightened Passenger, we go into passion. So it was on brand for me, but the influencer one I felt I could keep using. I mean, I could have changed the names to leaders. Let's do leadership.
Right.
But again, leadership is somewhat seems old-fashioned in some ways now. Like it just, I don't think you can win with, especially in the world we're in now, where there's a lot of, I don't like this, so I'm going to tell everybody, so I think now it's a little harder. So I just I made peace with it after the change, but I wouldn't change back. And at the same time, I don't regret the change. But if I was in the same situation I am now, knowing what I know now, I might have even kept the passion in there. Who knows?
All right. So I want to take us back to when you found out how much money Tony Robbins got paid and you decided that you needed to become a paid speaker. What was that like? How hard or easy was it to figure out what your topics were going to be, how to position yourself, how to pitch yourself, and how to ask for the amount of money that you deserved?
Hard is the answer. So I was led to believe, I listened to this audio CD for people that may not know what a CD is. You put it and push it in this little, I know they still exist, but slot in the car, and it would play music. Yeah. And so I listened to this CD over and over again, put out by the National Speaking Association. And it was different speakers sharing how to get bookings and all those kind of things, how to deliver a great talk. And there was this couple on there, and they said, basically is if you market yourself correctly and build it, they will come and you'll be flooded with bookings and you'll never have to look for clients again. And I've been doing this now 20 some years. I've helped thousands of people do this, and I've yet to see that in real life, unless you're a celebrity speaker, unless you're like, again, Tony Robbins or whoever. Like Tony built up a whole thing on infomercials before he really got known as a speaker. Like it's the celebrity speakers for them. They like Les Brown built up such a credibility and such a business that like the last time I talked to him, he said he had 700 and some inquiries for a possible 100 days he could speak. So, I mean, that's not normal. That's not what most people experience. And I jokingly now say, I was told by this couple that if you build it, they will come. So I started building it. Nobody even heard my hammer. I like, it wasn't the same. So it was really hard. And so everything I did in the trenches, and this goes back to that point earlier, you have to be passionate about it. I don't know how I could have ever stayed in or lasted as long as I did in the speaking business if it wasn't a passion. So like when I started out, I was doing talks for honorariums that would be equivalent to a dinner at the event that I'm speaking at. for my first paid quote unquote talk ever was 3 90-day gym memberships because I did the talk for a fitness place.
Okay.
And basically, instead of paying me cash, they said, we'll give you 3 90-day gym memberships that you can give to other clients. And I was like, okay, as long as you give me a testimonial if you like my talk.
Yeah.
And he wrote me a reference letter, and I had about 4 testimonials I could use on my website that were worth many times what I would have been paid anyway. After that talk, though, one of the things was I've seen many presenters over the last 24 years, and I've enjoyed many, none more so than you. And I don't think I was that good because it was like my first early talks. But another thing he said was, we know now we need you for all of our future sales training. And so I ended up doing for a year, probably 7 or 8 of them with that group. But here's the thing. That's how much they loved me and wanted me there. And the grand total of revenue I got for the next talk was $250.
Yeah.
And eventually I got bumped to 5 and then $750. And then when I got to 1,000, he said, I can't pay any more than that. And we parted ways.
Yeah.
But my point is, that's how hard it was. Like, I was doing them for gym memberships, for honorariums. I was speaking for free. There were a couple times back then I paid to get a stage. And people still do that. And there's sometimes good reason to do that. But my point is, that was my level. And it was always tooth and nails early on to get bookings. And I didn't have any system. I also didn't have any local mentors that I knew. So I was learning this all as I went. And so to come up with the idea of what I want to speak on, that part was a little easier, but still took time to figure out how you charge somebody. That took time. To eventually ask for a fee, that was hard because then I had to sit there silent and see what they said.
And you also had to be willing to say no.
Yeah, which I wasn't, by the way. They didn't know that, but it was like, okay, I'm going to need, to make this work, I'm going to need $500. I'm sorry, we have no budget. Okay, what time should I come in? Look out. It wasn't that, but that's really where I was at. It was desperation. Because what I did, it was a little easier. This is going to sound strange. The first couple of years, it was a side hustle. And it's kind of wild. I didn't get a whole lot of well-paid bookings, but the bookings came easier when it was a side hustle because I only needed I could only take 15 bookings a year. And so I would have as many as I needed, but they weren't paying well, or they gym memberships or whatever. Then when I decided, I was with a company and we're deciding to renew my contract. It was yearly. And I said I didn't want to move to a different country. They wanted me to. I wanted to just give the speaking thing a go. I went full time. That's why I say then it was desperation, because that was full time. And I'd given up a 6-figure guaranteed income.
Right.
And that first year was feast or famine. It was really hard. I had a bit of money put away solely because I was making a good amount of money, but it wasn't enough. And so 6 months in, desperation hit. And it was I did a couple of consulting gigs I wouldn't have done otherwise.
Yes.
And learning, I did this big company talk, and I didn't know to put it in the contract that they had to pay half up front or any up front. It's a huge company, and their policy was 90 to 160 days, 180, up to 6 months. And I talked after I did the talk, then they told me that. I didn't know that. I was waiting for this check to come. It was a big check. And the guy that hired me said, Corey, you should have told us that. He said they wanted your talk desperately. They would have agreed to that. But once it's done.
Yeah. It's hard. Sometimes I did a workshop a few months ago for Red Bull, and same. It's a long cycle, and you have to, if you're not on top of it because you have so many other things going on, then it all gets delayed. So you've been able to weave all of this experience, this lived experience that you have, into how you help other people get booked.
Yes. And I will say, because this ties into it, I did start to learn some hacks early on. And I'll even say not learn. I kind of racked my brain. I feel like people are like, oh, it's so amazing what you came up with. I'm like, yeah, but it took 2 years of racking my brain. How do you find the meeting planner? How do you know who they hired before? How do you know what they paid them? So, and if you know all those things, and you know they hire speakers that charge what you charge to speak on what you charge. Speak on what you want, them to speak on. So that was really how it started changing for me. And then also, I ended up getting a gig. It took me a year to sell them on it, teaching a sales course at the local college. And what would happen is people would say, well, we want to send our staff to see Corey, but we can't take the time off work. Can we bring him into our company? And the college was like, we don't care. Do what you want. Here's his number. And so they came to me and I'm like, okay, well, you were going to send 50 people at $300 a person. That's $15,000. If I charge you $2,000, you're going to think I'm the hero. And I can't charge more than that because I know I'm not at that level yet. And you're going to find me. Wow. And so that's how I started getting some bookings as well. So that's kind of how it started evolving. But what happened was, once I started, so let's say 5 years in, I was literally, I get to a point where it was 200 paid bookings in a year.
Wow.
So it went from struggling to barely getting paid. But so and those hacks I mentioned did it. And so what happened was people started seeing me post over and over again, so blessed to get paid to do what I love, and post a picture of me speaking. And then they started reaching out saying, how How are you getting so many paid bookings? How are you doing it so often? What I found fascinating is some of these people that when I was on the way up told me, oh, bro, you may or may not survive, but it's so easy to do this. And they had sought after speaker on their listing. And then they open up to me after I'm starting to share that I'm finally getting it, because they knew I was open about when I was struggling too. And so they would come to me and I'd say, well, oh, I thought you were crushing it. Yeah. No, well, the truth is, I speak about 6 times a year, but I've never been paid. Stuff like that. But they had like speaker and they were telling me, oh yeah, but it's the best business in the world. And so what happened was when they started opening up and started asking me questions, I started flooded, like the doors were open and I started getting flooded with, how do you do this? How did you do this? How did you do that? And eventually I realized I was doing a disservice by telling everybody over and over, including doing a disservice to myself, because obviously this is something people will pay for if they're driving me nuts for the answers. Yeah. And so I finally put together a self-study, get paid to speak program.
Okay.
That we've had over 1,000 people go through that, and we don't even open the doors often on it now. So it was really popular, helped a lot of people. But what I discovered is a lot of people, you can show them how to fish.
Yeah.
But sometimes they want to be fishing, but they don't want to bait the hook.
Right.
Well, they didn't want to necessarily do the work that I'm sharing that's involved in me, because it isn't easy. Right. But it's very lucrative and it's very rewarding. Like there's almost nothing else more rewarding. But I'd say, here's the exact system I use. And they're like, oh, sounds great. But then not use it. And I even show them, you can hire a VA to do what I'm showing you.
Yeah.
$10 to $20 a day. So we're talking, if it was 10 a day, what's that? Less than $300 a month? Mm-hmm. And you can do this without even having to, all you have to do is whenever somebody's actively looking, start talking to them. That's it. So you don't even have to do cold calling or nothing. And people still were like, yeah, but that seems like a lot of work. Now I have to manage a VA. Yeah, but I'll show you the system. Anyway, I digress. So what happened was, because of that, eventually we decided to launch this thing we have now called Blue Talks.
Okay.
And Blue Talks, it's a bit different because we actually book the venues. We put out self-published books. Oh. We have a podcast, virtual event, what have you. And so what we do now is we provide the platforms to feature people while also showing them how to leverage those platforms and get pages. And then the latest thing we launched recently, as in like 6 months ago or less, was a thing called the Blue Talks Experts Bureau. Mm-hmm. So it's a mixture between a speaking bureau and a PR firm. And essentially, we now go out and find the opportunities for people on top of that. So for people to say, I don't want to do the work, we're getting them all the stuff that they need, the assets like video and book and becoming a best-selling author, speaking at a venue like MIT, having a video of that and all that stuff that they can leverage forever. But then also for those that want work within the bureau, we'll actually go and find them the bookings. Mm-hmm. And like just an example, just today, a lady that we got booked yesterday sent a message showing her interview that she did today on Fox. We had another person that just shared the one we got him on ABC yesterday. Like we got it, he shared it yesterday, but we got it about a week ago. And then we have another one that's on NBC tomorrow. So it's like, that's what we're doing now is we're getting people on platforms while also helping them get all the footage and stuff they need to be able to demonstrate that they're the right person. So now we're trying to help them more directly get the gigs, essentially, because I learned that they didn't want to necessarily do that work. And the other thing we've been helping people with is how to land a branded talk, like a TEDx talk, because that can open up the floodgates as well. And I just did my 5th TEDx talk last week.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations. Now, is there a huge barrier to entry for somebody to have access to you, to your team, to figure out how to do this? Because people are at different levels of income. Some people might be like, I feel like I'm in continuous startup mode because I'm always like iterating the next version of whatever I'm working on, right? So I imagine there are other people who are in the entrepreneur world who are the same.
Yeah, so I feel like there's different starting points to building up to working with us. And I say that in the sense that, like, I have it here somewhere, but the new book that I referenced earlier, which is kind of, it's related, but it's more about how to become a richer person and wealthy person overall. Mm-hmm. So it's more like Think and Grow Rich and more like The Alchemist. And it's more of that type of book, but it's a low cost of entry because it's right now at $16.95 US to buy the book. As you said, on pre-order. But if you buy through our website, the one you see on here, you get 5 bonuses. Those bonuses, so one of them is a condensed training of how to land your branded talk, like a TEDx.
Yeah.
Another one on there is how to learn how to charge more. Literally, and it's not just like me saying, you can charge more, you're good. It's literally me breaking down how Apple, Harley, how they did it, and the exact things they do that you can do. So you get 5 trainings by buying the book for $16.95. The other low cost of entry is we actually have 4 podcasts in total. So you could go to Get Paid to Speak, which is one of my podcasts, and learn every time we do an episode, it's like a short 3 or 4 minute clip on how you can crush it on a stage. So what I'm saying is there's free no cost of entries really. Or the other thing we're doing coming out up in May is we're doing our experts boot camp. And when we do that, it's 3 full days virtual. And we break so this one, we have Marie Diamond from The Secret's going to be joining us. We have Randy Spelling from 90210. Basically what we do is we feature big name thought leaders. I do training around how to get paid to speak, how to write a book, all that stuff. We have coaches on that'll give you laser coaching sessions for free. Each person gets 1 coaching minimum. Also, we do tons of amazing prizes and networking, pitch podcasters, all this stuff. Well, what we decide to do this time is if a person wants to attend, if they buy 1 copy of the book, then they get in for the boot camp. If they buy 3 copies from 3 different retailers, because it helps me with 3 sales, and send us the order numbers, there's a place to do this. Yep. They actually get the recordings forever as well.
Oh, and is that also available on thisisthebook.com? Because I see get your copy at one of these retailers, copy the retail order number, submit it, and then you get the free bonuses, join the community. And then in that community, then they also learning about this boot camp, or is that another website?
It's another website. I'm going to get it for you while we're talking. It's not one I say as often, but yeah, there is another website. And having said that, so the other side to what you asked, there's the side where I have the website right now. I don't know if I can put it. I know people won't see it if I put it in the comments, and I'm sure we can put it in later in the show notes if you guys have the show notes. But the website itself for that one, it's a bit more different. But it's thepassioncure.com.
Okay.
/speaking-bootcamp. So, but having said that, it's a little bit more unique, and I'll probably set up another redirect page soon. I probably should just thespeakingbootcamp.com or something. I just haven't had a chance. We just decided on doing this in the last couple of days. And we've already had, I think, 100 people that have done this. So, The cool part is that's 300 books sold, right? It's a win-win because now they have books they can give away as gifts, but they're getting the full thing of the boot camp as well. So what I just told you there, Anika, is multiple ways to work with us without, I'm going to call it, really hitting your budget at all. The boot camp, 3 books is $50. Obviously, the other side, when you're working with us on the other things I talked about, then you get into thousands. The ideal situation is, if you land a TEDx talk, you might leverage it for 1 paid booking a week later and pay for it for the rest of your life. And now you have a TEDx talk for the rest of your life. Yeah. So I believe that it's even those, for most people, the return will be many times what the investment is. But what I'm saying is these, to me, the ways I shared are probably the best ways to test this out first.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's always important because we hear so much about all the different tools and resources that are out there, but, signing up for something before you really know what you're getting into and that you're going to spend the time to work it the way you need to, because it is an investment of money and time and energy. So I know we need to wrap up soon because we've gone a little bit long, which is fantastic because I'm really enjoying our conversation. But I also wanted to flag, because you also talk about why it's more important sometimes to say no and to know when to say no than to say yes. What does that mean?
So I've been trying to say that no is the new yes now for a while. I've been trying to get this to catch on because I want people to know what I've discovered and how important it is. What this means really, though, is that I won't go too far into backstory. I'll just say I've been interviewing 7,500 thought leaders plus right now. And so it's a real research. This is not just like me just pulling that in my butt, saying, here's this a number. And because people sometimes will say 80% of people, I'm like, where'd you get that? It felt right. But that's not what I'm saying. This is real. What I've noticed at this part, I won't say an exact number because it constantly changes. But as I started sifting through the research and continued to ask about it, what I've noticed is the top thought leaders, the top influencers, the people at the top of their game say no. So I'm going to say minimum 20 times more than the average. But why that's significant is because I grew up being told to say yes to everything and living in a... And then I started interviewing thought leaders and noticed, man, they all say no a lot. And I'm saying yes, but I want to become like them. Maybe I need to start investigating, should I say no more? So what they do is typically they figure out what a yes and a no is, and then they say yes to only the things that will move the needle, and no to everything else that won't. And what I think the reason is because they realized and figured out everything you say yes to means you're saying no to something else.
Exactly. You're not leaving the space for the thing that you really want to come into your life. Yeah.
And I think it's also the component of you're confident enough to be proactive in what's a yes and a no for you, whereas a lot of people just say yes to everything. You're actually saying, no, I'm taking the power back. You're also preserving your sanity, because now these days, there's so many opportunities, whether it's pay to play, whether it's free, whether you're getting paid. There's so many opportunities. You could literally just go nonstop and saying yes to every person that reaches out. And especially if you're active, every person that reaches out would eat up your time and you wouldn't even get to the 50 other things that are there. And you're not really knowing what is a true yes or a no. So the short answer about that is, yeah, I've discovered that no should be the new yes, because when you can figure out what to say no to and do it often, you're going to be leaving your time mostly with the things that are going to take you to where you want to get to.
Yeah. We could talk about that for probably an hour more, because I completely subscribe to that philosophy. And I believe in JOMO, the joy of missing out, very strongly, because it's not really missing out, right? It's giving the opportunity for something even better to come in and to appear. But Corey, gosh, we have packed so much great information into this episode. I really thank you so much for offering your expertise, your story, really inspiring everybody who's listening, including myself. So I want to ask one final question. Is there a mantra, a verse, some words of wisdom, a motto that you live by every day that helps you get to that next level?
So there's a few of them, and one of them is no is the new yes. But anyway, we'll move. Since I just said that one, I won't say that one. I shared one earlier, E plus R equals O. I carry around every day. Another one, so I have two chips. One's black and one's red, poker chips. The red one says PMA on it, which is positive mental attitude. And where it came from is there's a book, Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude. Napoleon Hill and W. Clement Stone wrote together. And the idea is they say everybody has an invisible talisman with an NMA on one side, PMA on the other.
Wow.
I put it mine with PMA on both sides because I'm like, why would I want to carry negative mental attitude around with me? But so I think about those two chips when things happen each day. So I would say that's almost like a mantra in some ways that I carry around with me. And then the last one, since those ones mostly I said already earlier in the show, is I'll say Zig Ziglar, who I really was a big inspiration for me. He's the first VHS, but first training video I ever seen in my life. I can still tell you almost everything in that video 20 some years ago that I watched once. That's how good he was. And Zig said, you can have everything in life if you want, if you will just help enough other people get what they want.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I live my days that way.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of those words of wisdom with us. Again, a lot to think about. I'm definitely going to be listening to this episode a few times, because I like to listen to the episodes because I always like pick something up that I didn't get to really think about too much when we were in the moment. But then it also reminds me that, oh yeah, I need to do that one thing, or I need to buy that book, or I need to do this, So thank you for just bringing your positive mental attitude and all of your energy and inspiration to your brand Amplified today.
Well, thank you so much. And I will say, for my ending closing, as far as the book itself, the new book, as you mentioned, we talked about the website a few times, thisisthebook.com. So people can go there and learn all about it. But the one thing I didn't mention, which I think is important to know about it is a fictional parable book. Yeah. And so in the vein of The Alchemist or Celestine, Richest Man in Babylon, if people have heard of those books, it's that type of book about two strangers on a plane. One buys a seat in first class and actually pays for the second seat to not have anybody next to him. Young business person thinks he knows it all, falls asleep on the flight, wakes up. He has an old man sitting next to him who told me he was bumped up to first class. And basically the book is about how that older gentleman teaches the younger gentleman life lessons that transform his life on the flight, which is why the book's subheader is The Flight That Changes Everything. And so anyway, I just want to share with people, that's what the book's about. It shares 10 life lessons. And what I only discovered after I wrote it, sadly, a while later, I didn't realize this until, is I'm actually the two characters. So I was the young character, and I wasn't arrogant, but I was still thought I knew everything. And now I'm hopefully closer to the wise character, Treb. But I share my journeys through Treb's stories. But what's really wild about it, if for people when they're reading it, might surprise people, because I don't think it's very common, is if I sat with Les Brown in his living room, and he said to me in an interview, synchronicity is God's way of staying anonymous. In the book, I shared it as if Treb was backstage with Les Brown. So it's loosely based on true things that all happen, but me sharing them through the eyes of this gentleman who's traveled the world and looks like described as an older Wayne Dyer.
Yeah.
So that's what the book's about. If people want.
Fantastic. And with that, thank you to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode. I will have so many links in the chat and in the show notes for you. But I appreciate you coming back and joining me for another amazing expert and their story on Your Brand Amplified. I'll be back again with another guest very shortly who will lend their expertise to make your day, your job, your life a little brighter. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.